$85 for 3 weeks. That was the exact price my husband placed on my independence. He stood in our custom kitchen, towering over me with a smug smile, fully convinced he had just asserted his dominance as the man of the house. He thought taking over my bank accounts and stripping me of my financial freedom would finally force me into submission. He expected tears. He expected me to beg for access to my own hard-earned money. What he did not expect was for me to pack a single black suitcase on a Wednesday morning while he was at a routine dental appointment. When he unlocked the front door of our luxury Atlanta home a few hours later, the house was deafeningly silent. All my closet shelves were completely bare. I was gone. By noon, he had called my phone 73 times in a blind panic. But that was only the very first trick in my grand illusion. I am Nia. I am 32 years old, and I am the founder and CEO of a rapidly growing financial technology startup. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic partner who tried to dim your light and control your life. The wheels of my heavy black suitcase rolled smoothly across the Brazilian oak floors of our massive foyer. The clicking sound echoed in the empty house, signaling the absolute end of an era. I paused at the kitchen island one last time before leaving. The silence in the house was heavy, but incredibly peaceful. For 4 years, I had walked on eggshells in these rooms, constantly trying to shrink myself so my husband Marcus could feel bigger. Marcus is 35 years old and a mid-level branch manager at a regional bank. He thrived on the illusion that he was the primary breadwinner. His mother Brenda had raised him to believe that a successful black man needed a wife who stayed safely in his shadow. My ambition and my relentless drive had always been a massive thorn in his fragile pride. Living in an upscale neighborhood in Atlanta brought its own set of pressures. We were supposed to be the perfect power couple. We attended church on Sundays, hosted dinner parties, and smiled for social media. But behind closed doors, Marcus deeply resented my success. He hated that my tech company was gaining traction. He hated that I did not need his money. I looked around the pristine living room. I had paid for the velvet sofa. I had paid for the crystal chandelier. But today, I was leaving it all behind. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out the exact same bills he had handed me. 4 $20 bills and 1 crumpled $5 bill. I smoothed them out perfectly and centered them on the cold marble countertop right next to his favorite coffee mug. I pulled a yellow sticky note from the drawer and wrote a simple message. Here is your rent money for the month. Do not spend it all in one place. I pressed the note firmly next to the cash. I walked out the front door, locked the heavy deadbolt, and stepped into the crisp Georgia air without a single ounce of regret. A premium black SUV was already waiting for me in the driveway. The driver respectfully opened the door, and as I settled into the plush leather seat, he handed me a chilled glass of expensive champagne. I took a slow, deliberate sip, watching our pristine suburban neighborhood roll by through the tinted window. My phone vibrated endlessly inside my purse. The screen lit up again and again. It was Marcus. He had just gotten home from his appointment. I could picture him perfectly, walking into the house calling my name, expecting me to be in the kitchen preparing his lunch. Then the realization hitting him as he saw the empty closets. The panic setting in as he saw the $85 on the counter. I watched the missed call counter tick higher, 71, 72, 73, followed by a barrage of frantic text messages demanding to know where his wife was. He typed in all capital letters demanding that I answer the phone immediately. A cold, calculated smile crept onto my face. He was finally starting to realize that the woman he had tried to cage had just bought the entire zoo. He thought he held all the cards because he had bullied me into handing over a bank password. He thought he was teaching me a lesson in respect. But he had absolutely no idea that the accounts he seized were completely empty decoys. He did not know that my financial technology company was only weeks away from a multi-million-dollar buyout. I took another sip of champagne and let my phone go straight to voicemail. The voicemail icon popped up on my screen. I pressed play and held the speaker to my ear. His voice was shaking with a mix of rage and terror. "Nia, where are you? You cannot just leave. You do not have a dime to your name. Call me back right now or I swear you will regret this." I deleted the message before he even finished his sentence. I leaned my head back against the cool leather seat and closed my eyes. The taste of the champagne was sweet, but the taste of freedom was absolutely intoxicating. He really believed he had left me with nothing. He really believed a woman like me would just roll over and accept a life of financial abuse. To fully understand how a successful tech CEO ended up accepting an $85 allowance from her arrogant bank manager husband, we have to rewind exactly 3 weeks. The foundation of his control did not crumble overnight. It was a slow-building nightmare that started with a single aggressive power play over breakfast. I had spent years trying to build a partnership, trying to uplift the man I loved, but his insecurities were a bottomless pit. He needed to break me to feel whole. And 3 weeks ago, he finally made his ultimate move completely unaware that he was stepping directly into a trap I had carefully laid out. It was a typical Tuesday morning, the day my life changed forever, the day he decided to show me his true colors. 2 days after the breakfast incident, I received a phone call from my mother. She was at the pharmacy, and her insurance had temporarily rejected her blood pressure medication. She was short exactly $40 and asked if I could help her out. I told her not to worry and drove straight to the nearest branch of Marcus Bank. I still had the debit card for the secondary account I had given him access to. There should have been at least $3,000 sitting in that checking account. It was the account I used for minor personal expenses before he decided to seize control. I walked up to the teller window and handed my card to a young woman with a tight ponytail and a condescending smile. She swiped the card and looked at her screen. Then she looked up at me, her smile widening just a fraction. "I am sorry, ma'am, but this card is declining." She said it loudly enough for the person at the next window to hear. I frowned and politely asked her to run it again. "There must be a mistake," I said. "There is plenty of money in that account." She slowly typed on her keyboard, making a show of checking the details. "The system says the balance is negative $12. She tilted her head, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "If you want, I can call Mr. Marcus at the main branch to authorize an overdraft." My blood ran completely cold. I stared at the screen reflecting in the glass partition. Marcus had not just monitored my account, he had completely drained it. Every single dollar I had left in that decoy account was gone. He had left me with a negative balance and $85 in cash to survive on. The humiliation burned in my chest, but before I could even process the theft, a familiar grating voice echoed through the quiet bank lobby. "Well, if it isn't our favorite struggling tech genius." I turned around to see Heather walking toward me. Heather is my brother-in-law, Kevin's wife. She is a white woman who married into our black family and immediately decided she was the absolute authority on how we should all live our lives. She strutted across the marble floor, her heels clicking loudly. Slung over her forearm was a brand new pristine Prada handbag that easily cost $3,000. She stopped right next to me, looking me up and down with an expression of pure pity. "Having card trouble, Nia." She sighed dramatically and placed her expensive new bag on the counter right next to my declined debit card. "Marcus told us at dinner that your little startup was bleeding money. He said he had to step in and put you on a strict budget to save the family from ruin." I guess he was right. I looked from her smug face to the shiny hardware on her new Prada bag. Kevin was a chronic gambler. He had not held a steady job in 2 years. They were constantly underwater on their mortgage, yet here she was parading around with a designer purse that cost the exact amount missing from my checking account. Suddenly, the pieces clicked together in my mind. Marcus was not draining my account to save our family. He was stealing my money to secretly bail out his deadbeat brother and fund Heather's luxury lifestyle. He was playing the wealthy patriarch using my hard-earned cash. The teller watched us clearly, enjoying the free entertainment. Heather leaned in closer, her expensive perfume suffocating me. You know, Nia, you really should learn to just submit to your husband. Independent women always end up struggling. I let Kevin handle all the finances, and look how well he takes care of me. It is just the natural order of things. You should really learn your place before Marcus gets tired of carrying your dead weight. She smiled brightly, picked up her Prada bag, and walked toward the manager's office. Every eye in the bank lobby was glued to me. A few weeks ago, this level of public humiliation would have broken me. I would have run out to my car and cried out of shame. But standing there realizing my own husband was stealing from me to buy designer bags for his entitled sister-in-law, something inside me completely snapped. The sadness evaporated. The anger crystallized into pure icy focus. I looked back at the teller. She was waiting for me to break down. Instead, I offered her the warmest, most terrifying smile I could muster. Please cancel that card, I said calmly. I will not be needing it anymore. I walked out of the bank with my head held high. I did not have the $40 for my mother's medicine in that account, but I had a private offshore account that Marcus did not even know existed. I transferred the money to my mother from my phone before I even reached my car. Marcus thought he was a genius. He thought he had outsmarted me and reduced me to a helpless dependent. He had no idea that his little theft had just given me all the justification I needed to absolutely destroy his life. The gloves were officially off. Just 2 days after the incident at the bank, Sunday arrived. In Marcus family tradition, Sunday meant the mandatory afternoon barbecue at his mother Brenda's house. I walked through her heavy oak front door carrying a large glass bowl of potato salad that I had woken up at 6 in the morning to prepare. Brenda's house was always suffocating. The air was thick with the smell of vanilla room spray and smoked meats. Every wall was plastered with framed photographs of Marcus from childhood to adulthood. He was her absolute golden child, and the undisputed tiny king of her world. Brenda was standing in the kitchen wearing a pristine lace apron. Her sharp eyes darted toward me the second I placed the bowl on the marble countertop. She had a habit of tilting her chin up whenever she spoke to me, making sure I always felt like she was looking down on me. She picked up a fork and prodded at the potato salad with undisguised disgust. Nia, did you use yellow mustard instead of the stone-ground mustard? She sighed loudly enough for the relatives in the living room to hear. Marcus hates yellow mustard. He has a very sensitive stomach, and I have told you this 100 times. It is honestly pathetic that you cannot even remember your own husband's dietary needs. I kept my hands folded neatly in front of me. Before the bank incident, I would have apologized profusely and felt like a complete failure. But today, knowing her precious son was actively stealing from my bank accounts to fund his brother's gambling debts, I just offered her a gentle smile. Yes, Brenda, I replied softly. I will be sure to remember that for next time. My sudden submissiveness seemed to bore her, but she quickly found another angle of attack when the men walked into the kitchen. Marcus strolled in holding a craft beer, laughing loudly at something Kevin had just said. Brenda instantly abandoned the salad and rushed over to embrace Marcus like he was a war hero returning from battle. Look at my beautiful son, Brenda cooed, rubbing his shoulders while glaring pointedly at me. A real provider. Working hard all week at the bank to carry the weight of this entire family. You are doing too much, Marcus. You are the absolute king of this family, and you deserve a wife who makes your life easier, not harder. Marcus puffed out his chest, took a sip of his beer, and put on a mask of fake humility. It is nothing, Mom, he said smoothly. It is just the responsibility of a real man. Someone has to step up and control the finances, especially when certain people are playing make-believe with business ideas that do not bring in a single dime. He looked directly at me when he said that. A sharp giggle echoed from the living room couch. It was Heather. She was sitting there with her legs crossed, proudly displaying the stolen Prada bag next to her on the cushions. Marcus is so right, Heather chimed in. My Kevin is exactly the same way. He always makes sure I am completely taken care of. Women who try to be too independent just end up making themselves miserable and burdening their husbands. You really just need to let the men lead, Nia. Brenda nodded in fierce agreement and stepped closer to me, crossing her arms over her chest. She shifted into her favorite lecture mode. Nia, I am telling you this for your own good, she began, lowering her voice into a condescending whisper. As a woman of color, you need to understand your place in this world. Our men have to fight so hard for respect out there in society. When they come home, they need a sanctuary. You need to learn to step back so your husband can shine. This little tech startup hobby of yours is just an expensive distraction. You are draining Marcus dry. You need to swallow your pride, close that silly business down, and focus on being a proper wife. Every word out of her mouth was designed to cut me down. She was demanding that I shrink myself to support a thief. She was glorifying a man who was actively robbing his wife to subsidize his gambling-addicted brother. I looked around the room. Marcus was smirking with pure arrogance. Kevin was conveniently looking down at his phone, refusing to meet my eyes. Heather was beaming with unwarranted superiority. And Brenda stood there like the supreme judge of my worth. They had built an entire family dynamic on a foundation of absolute lies and delusions. You know what, Brenda? You are entirely right, I said. My voice was calm and steady. Marcus is managing our finances in ways I never even thought possible. He is incredibly creative with moving money around. I am learning so much from him. Marcus frowned slightly, perhaps catching the faint edge of sarcasm in my tone, but his massive ego quickly blinded him to the threat. He just scoffed, turned his back to me, and went right back to discussing sports bets with Kevin. As I carried a tray of empty ribs back into the kitchen, I passed by Kevin. He was nervously tapping his foot glued to his phone screen, probably checking the odds on a football game he could not afford to bet on. I stopped right next to him and handed him a glass of water. Make sure you stay hydrated, Kevin, I said sweetly. I know how stressful it can be when you owe people money. You are lucky you have a brother who is so willing to dip into his own pockets to keep you afloat. Kevin froze. His eyes darted up to meet mine, flashing with sudden panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but I just smiled and walked away before he could form a single word. I needed to plant that seed of paranoia. I needed Kevin to wonder just how much I actually knew, and I needed him to start sweating. I quietly backed away and stood in the corner of the kitchen, watching them gorge themselves on barbecue and stolen privileges. Enjoy your Sunday, I thought to myself. Soak up every last drop of this fake kingdom. They had no idea that I had already contacted the sharpest corporate attorney in Atlanta. They had no idea that I had already backed up every single one of Marcus's bank transfers to a secure encrypted cloud server. Brenda continued to parade around the backyard, loudly complaining to anyone who would listen about how I chopped the tomatoes too thickly. I just smiled, nodded, and played the perfect obedient wife. Later that evening, as we drove back to our house, Marcus was in a fantastic mood. He turned up the jazz music on the radio and patted my thigh. See how pleasant things can be when you just listen to my mother and respect my authority, he said. I stared out the passenger window at the passing streetlights. Yes, Marcus, I replied softly. I am finally seeing things with perfect clarity. What he did not realize was that the house we were driving back to, the beautiful 4-bedroom property he loved to brag about, was not actually his. When we bought it 3 years ago, his credit was terrible, so he had willingly signed away his rights, allowing me to put the deed under a limited liability company that I owned entirely. He had been too arrogant and lazy to read the paperwork back then. Now it was going to be the exact weapon that left him homeless. There is nothing more lethal than a woman who sees through every lie but chooses to stay perfectly silent. Let them have their barbecue. The real fire was coming, and it was going to burn this entire family's fake empire straight to the ground. But before we walked out to the driveway to head home that evening, Marcus made sure to deliver his grand finale. The entire family had gathered in Brenda's formal living room to say their extended goodbyes. Brenda was busy packing up leftover ribs and potato salad into plastic containers, handing generous portions to Kevin and Heather. She conveniently ran out of containers right as she got to me. I stood near the front door, holding my purse, waiting patiently for the agonizing Sunday ritual to finally conclude. The room was filled with the usual loud chatter. Heather was complaining to Brenda about the rising cost of her weekly manicure appointments, while Kevin nervously checked his phone, likely looking for updates on his latest sports bets. The conversation shifted to the economy, the cost of living, and the burdens of running a household. That was the exact opening Marcus had been waiting for all afternoon. He wanted one last opportunity to perform his role as the wealthy, burdened patriarch in front of his adoring audience. Marcus stepped into the center of the living room. He cleared his throat loudly, ensuring every single pair of eyes was resting right on him. "Nia, come here," he commanded. He used a tone that a person might use to call a disobedient dog back to its leash. I took a slow breath, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked over to him. The entire room went dead silent, watching us with eager anticipation. Marcus reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out his expensive leather wallet. He opened it slowly, making a deliberate show of browsing through a thick stack of bills. "I have been reviewing the household budget this week," Marcus announced to the room, though he was staring right down at my face. "And since your little startup project is not contributing a single dime to our mortgage, I need to make sure you are not making reckless financial decisions with my hard-earned money. It is my job to lead this family, and leadership means strict discipline." He reached into the wallet and pulled out a small amount of cash. He pinched the bills between his fingers and held them out toward me. I did not raise my hand immediately. I just stared at the money. "Take it," he snapped, his voice dropping an octave to sound more authoritative. I slowly raised my hand and opened my palm. Marcus counted the money out loud for the entire family to hear. 20, 40, 60, 80, and a 5. He slapped the 4 crisp $20 bills and one incredibly crumpled $5 bill into my palm. $85. This should be enough for groceries and gas for the next week, he sneered, his lips curling into a vicious smirk. "Do not overspend on those expensive organic vegetables you like so much. We are on a strict budget now. If you need anything else, you will have to submit a receipt and ask for my permission. Maybe this will motivate you to finally close down that failing business and get a real job." A chorus of laughter erupted in the living room. Heather covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with amusement as she leaned against Kevin. "Oh my goodness," Heather giggled. "An allowance. That is so cute, Marcus. You are treating her like a teenager who just got her first driving permit." Brenda clapped her hands together in absolute delight. She walked over and proudly patted her son on the back. "That is exactly how a strong man leads his household," Brenda declared proudly. "You tell her, Marcus. A woman needs to know her boundaries. Financial discipline is the only way she will ever learn to respect what you provide for her." Kevin snorted from the couch. "Make sure you do not spend it all on candy, Nia," he joked. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the mocking laughter of my in-laws. I looked down at the paper money resting in my palm. The crumpled $5 bill was slightly torn at the corner. My nails dug into the cheap paper. I did not blink. I did not shed a single tear. I did not flush with embarrassment. In that exact moment, the last remaining shred of empathy I had for my husband evaporated into thin air. My eyes hardened into pure, unbreakable steel. I looked up at Marcus. He was beaming, soaking up the validation from his mother and brother. He felt so incredibly powerful. He felt like a king. He had publicly shamed his wife, asserting his absolute dominance over my life for the grand total of $85. What Marcus did not know, and what his laughing family could not possibly comprehend, was the absolute irony of this public execution. While they were busy humiliating me over gas money, my corporate lawyer had already forwarded me the final term sheet for the acquisition of my financial technology startup. I was literally days away from a $22 million payout. I had spent the last 3 years building a digital infrastructure that major banks were desperately trying to buy. I was a millionaire standing in a living room full of people who were drowning in debt, pretending to be royalty. Even worse, Kevin was sitting there laughing at my $85 while actively hiding a $50,000 gambling debt. He was laughing at me, entirely unaware that the Prada bag on his wife's arm was purchased with money Marcus had stolen from my decoy bank account, just to keep Kevin out of jail. They were a family of hypocrites, thieves, and liars, all taking turns kicking me while they thought I was down. The sheer audacity of it all was beautiful. It gave me the exact clarity I needed. There would be no more marriage counseling. There would be no more conversations about trying to understand each other. This $85 was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I looked Marcus dead in the eyes. I did not look away until his smug smile began to falter just a fraction. Then I perfectly folded the bills in half and slipped them into the pocket of my dress. I let a serene, compliant smile wash over my face. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "You are absolutely right. I will make sure to use this money exactly as it was intended. I promise you I will stretch every single dollar." Brenda scoffed, clearly disappointed that I had not thrown a tantrum. "Well, it is about time you showed some gratitude," she muttered, turning away to hand Kevin his leftover barbecue. It was exactly 10 minutes after that public humiliation that we walked out to the driveway and got into our car to drive home. As Marcus turned up the jazz music on the radio and patted my thigh, praising me for finally respecting his authority, my mind was already several steps ahead. I reached into my pocket and touched the folded $85. It was no longer an insult. It was a prop for the greatest magic trick I was ever going to pull. I knew exactly what day I was going to leave. I knew exactly how I was going to destroy him. He wanted to be the sole provider of our household. I was going to gladly give him exactly what he asked for right after I took the house out from under him. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the heavy garage door closed behind us, sealing us safely inside. Marcus turned off the engine and sighed heavily, acting like a man carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. He told me to go on inside, saying he needed to make a quick phone call to a client before he could relax for the evening. I nodded, obediently stepped out of the car, and walked through the door that led into our laundry room. But as the door clicked shut behind me, I realized I had left my phone sitting on the passenger seat. I turned the handle to go back into the dimly lit garage. I opened the door just a crack, and I completely froze. Marcus was pacing back and forth next to his car. The harsh fluorescent light of the garage illuminated his angry features. He was not talking to a client. He was holding his phone in front of his face on speakerphone, and I could clearly hear Kevin's frantic voice echoing in the quiet space. "I just gave you $3,000 on Thursday, Kevin." Marcus hissed, his voice tight with pure venom. "I transferred it directly into your hidden checking account. How the hell are you already asking me for more money?" Kevin sounded breathless and panicked like a cornered animal. "I know, man, I know. But the bookies are breathing down my neck. I owed them $5,000, not 3. They are threatening to show up at my house, Marcus. If Heather finds out about this massive debt, she will divorce me and take everything. You have to help me out one last time." Marcus slapped his hand violently against the hood of his luxury sedan. "Do you think I care about Heather right now? I had to freeze my own wife's credit cards and completely drain her personal checking account just to keep your kneecaps from getting broken by thugs. I am risking my own marriage and my career at the bank to cover your massive gambling addiction. If the auditors catch this, we are both going to federal prison." I stood there in the shadows of the laundry room, absolutely paralyzed. I held my breath, terrified that even the slightest sound would give me away. The damp smell of motor oil and concrete filled my nose as my mind scrambled to process the words I was hearing. The pieces of the puzzle were finally snapping together with terrifying clarity. Marcus did not take my money to save for our future. He did not take it simply to assert his dominance as the head of the household. He stole my hard-earned money because he was secretly funneling cash to his deadbeat brother. But Kevin's next words made my blood run completely cold. "I did not spend the $3,000 on the debt, Marcus," Kevin admitted, his voice trembling with shame. "I withdrew it in cash to pay the bookie, but I foolishly left the envelope in my home office desk drawer. Heather found it yesterday. She thought I got a surprise bonus at work, and she took the money straight to the mall. She bought that stupid designer Prada bag she was showing off at the barbecue today. I could not stop her without admitting that the money was stolen and that I am $50,000 in the hole. A suffocating wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me. I pressed my back against the cool wall of the laundry room, closing my eyes. The $3,000 Prada bag, the exact same bag Heather had proudly placed on the marble counter at the bank, right next to my declined debit card. The bag she had paraded around the living room while arrogantly lecturing me about how women need to be submissive and let their husbands provide. Her husband was not providing a single thing. Her husband was a degenerate gambler, and her entire luxury lifestyle was being funded directly by the money stolen from my bank account. Marcus let out a string of vicious curses. You let her buy a designer bag with the money I stole from my wife. Do you know how hard it is to keep Nia convinced that we are completely broke? I gave her $85 in front of everyone today, just to keep her humiliated and distracted. I need her to feel so small and so financially dependent that she never dares to look closely at our main accounts. Because if she checks the transaction history, she will see that I have been siphoning thousands of dollars to you for the past 6 months. Kevin pleaded desperately through the phone. Please, Marcus, just one more transfer. Use your bank manager override. Move some money from Nia business account. She will not even notice it is gone. I cannot touch her business account, you absolute idiot, Marcus snapped loudly. She has it locked down with dual authentication and military-grade encryption. That is exactly why I had to bully her into giving me the password for her personal checking account. I am tapped out, Kevin. You need to figure this out on your own before my wife figures out that I am committing wire fraud. Wire fraud. The words hung heavily in the damp air of the garage. Marcus had just casually confessed to a federal crime on speakerphone. He was exploiting his position at the regional bank to override security protocols. He was shifting the money in small increments to avoid triggering the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. A classic structuring scheme known as smurfing. He was a branch manager engaging in basic money laundering right under the nose of federal regulators, and he was using my name and my personal accounts to do it. He was not just a toxic, manipulating husband anymore. He was a white-collar criminal. I slowly pulled the door shut, making sure the hinges did not make a single sound. I stood alone in the laundry room, staring blankly at the washing machine while my mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Every single confusing action from the past few weeks suddenly made perfect sense. His sudden obsession with our household budget, his desperate need to control my spending, his aggressive public humiliation tactics in front of his mother and brother. It was all a carefully constructed smokescreen designed to hide his own massive financial crimes. For 4 years, I had questioned my own worth in this marriage. I had let his insecurities dictate my wardrobe, my tone of voice, and my career decisions. I had sat at his mother dining table and swallowed insults because I believed marriage required sacrifice. But this was not sacrifice. This was a calculated financial hostage situation. They thought they were so incredibly smart. They thought because I was a woman who spent my days writing code and building software that I was completely oblivious to the real world. But I built financial security systems for a living. Tracking digital money trails and identifying fraudulent transactions was literally what my $22 million company was designed to do. Finding his clumsy illegal transfers would take me less than 5 minutes once I sat down at my computer. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a tall glass of iced water. My hands were perfectly steady. I was no longer just planning a simple divorce. I was planning a complete and total demolition of his entire life. When Marcus walked into the house 10 minutes later, he had a perfectly calm smile plastered on his face. He kissed my cheek like a loving husband and asked me what I wanted to watch on television. I smiled back at him, sweet and completely compliant. Whatever you want to watch, honey, I replied. You are the man of the house after all. I watched him walk into the living room and sink into the comfortable cushions of the sofa. He was completely unaware that he was a dead man walking. He had handed me the $85 to keep me under his thumb. But by doing so, he had given me the exact motivation I needed to dig into his darkest secrets. I spent the rest of that Sunday evening sitting quietly beside him, pretending to watch a movie, while my mind meticulously mapped out his absolute destruction. First thing Monday morning, I was going to call my corporate lawyer. I did not need a standard divorce attorney. I needed a forensic accountant and a federal litigation specialist. I was going to quietly compile every single piece of digital evidence proving his wire fraud. And then I was going to wait for the absolute perfect moment to drop the bomb. I thought about Heather carrying that stolen Prada bag. I thought about Brenda telling me to shrink myself so my husband could shine. I thought about Kevin laughing at my crumpled $5 bill. They had all enthusiastically participated in my public humiliation, so they were all going to participate in the catastrophic fallout. Monday morning arrived with a cold and beautiful clarity. The gears of my revenge officially started turning the second Marcus backed his car out of the driveway to head to the bank. I picked up my phone and called the most ruthless corporate litigation and forensic accounting firm in Atlanta. But to the outside world, and especially to my husband, I was a completely defeated woman. I knew that in order to execute a flawless destruction of his life, I needed him to feel absolutely invincible. I needed him to believe that his financial abuse had completely broken my spirit. So I began the greatest acting performance of my entire life. The next evening, I made sure Marcus accompanied me to the grocery store. I wanted him to witness my total submission up close. I walked down the brightly lit fluorescent aisles holding a cheap plastic binder filled with clipped newspaper coupons. I carefully compared the unit prices of generic canned beans, making a highly visible show of putting the name brand items back on the shelf with a heavy sigh. As I reached for a discounted loaf of bread, I caught his reflection in the glass door of the frozen food section. He was standing a few feet behind me with his arms crossed over his chest, wearing a smile of absolute triumphant superiority. He was watching me shrink myself, and he was entirely captivated by the power he held over me. When we got to the checkout lane, I handed the cashier my crumpled coupons and the remaining $50 from my ridiculous allowance. The total came out to $53.12. I purposely acted frantic, checking my empty wallet before turning to Marcus with wide, pleading eyes. I quietly asked him if he could please spare $4, because I had miscalculated the grocery tax. He let out a loud, patronizing sigh that the entire checkout line could hear. He slowly pulled out his expensive leather wallet and handed the cashier a crisp $5 bill, soaking up the admiring glance from the teenage clerk who clearly thought he was a generous and patient provider. "Keep the change," he told the cashier without even looking at me. I kept my head down and whispered a pathetic thank you. He loved it. For the next 2 weeks, I played the role of the broken, submissive wife to absolute perfection. I cooked dinner every single night using the cheapest ingredients I could possibly find. I served him generic brand pasta and heavily discounted cuts of tough meat. When he sat at the dining table and complained that the steak was overcooked and chewy, I did not argue. I immediately apologized, looked down at my plate, and promised I would do much better next time. I asked for his permission before running the dishwasher just to make sure I was not wasting electricity. I asked if I was allowed to buy a new tube of toothpaste. Every single time I begged for $1 or asked for his approval, his fragile ego inflated just a little bit more. He thrived on my manufactured misery. His family was absolutely thrilled by my sudden transformation. Brenda and Heather completely dropped their guard. Brenda came over unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon to inspect my housekeeping skills. She ran her manicured finger along the baseboards in the hallway and criticized the way I had folded the decorative bath towels in the guest bathroom. "You see, Nia," she lectured while sipping the cheap tea I had prepared for her. "This is what happens when a woman stops trying to act like a man and focuses on her actual duties. Marcus seems so much more relaxed now that you are finally pulling your weight around here." I just nodded politely and thanked her for her invaluable wisdom. Heather stopped by a few days later, practically dragging her stolen Prada bag across my kitchen island. She casually mentioned that Kevin was taking her on a luxury weekend spa trip in the mountains. She claimed it was funded by yet another mysterious bonus from his non-existent job. I offered her a glass of tap water and told her how incredibly lucky she was to have a husband who provided for her so well. She beamed with arrogant pride, adjusting her diamond wedding ring. "It just takes a certain type of woman to inspire a man to provide, Nia," she said with a sickly sweet smile. "Maybe if you keep practicing, you will get there one day." She was completely unaware that her luxurious weekend getaway was being funded by federal wire fraud committed by my husband. They all thought they had finally put the ambitious independent black woman right back in her place. They thought I was drowning in my own failure. But they were only seeing the exact illusion I meticulously crafted for them. While I was clipping coupons at the kitchen table during the day, I was sitting in my locked home office late at night executing a masterclass in corporate warfare. My attorney, a brilliant and ruthless woman named Sarah, was quietly pulling every single thread of Marcus' financial life. Sarah and her team of forensic accountants had already bypassed his clumsy attempts at covering his tracks. They documented every single unauthorized transfer. They traced the stolen money from my decoy checking account straight through the bank internal override system and directly into Kevin's hidden offshore betting accounts. We had the exact dates, the exact timestamps, the exact dollar amounts, and the specific IP addresses Marcus used to commit his crimes. We were quietly building an airtight federal indictment while Marcus was busy gloating over my strict grocery budget. The contrast between my public humiliation and my private power was absolutely exhilarating. Every time Marcus handed me a crumpled $5 bill and told me to be grateful, I smiled, knowing that my corporate buyout was moving smoothly through the final stages of regulatory approval. I was letting him dig his own grave, and I was cheerfully handing him the shovel every single day. I just needed him to feel completely invincible so that when the ground finally collapsed beneath his feet, the fall would utterly destroy him. He wanted a submissive wife who relied on him for survival. I gave him exactly what he asked for, right up until the moment I decided it was time to collect my debts. The clock on my nightstand glowed a faint blue, reading exactly 2 in the morning. Marcus was fast asleep next to me, snoring softly, completely oblivious to the world. He was dreaming of his dominance, dreaming of the generic brand pasta I had cooked for him, and the pathetic way I had begged for $4 at the grocery store. I carefully slid out from under the heavy down comforter, making sure the mattress did not creak. My bare feet were completely silent on the hardwood floor as I slipped out of the master bedroom and walked down the dark hallway to my home office. I stepped inside, shut the heavy wooden door, and locked the deadbolt. During the day, I was the submissive, pitiful wife clipping coupons at the kitchen island. But at midnight, in the glowing light of my computer screen, I was an absolute titan. I sat down at my mahogany desk and woke up my laptop. I opened a secure encrypted video conferencing application. My lead corporate attorney, Sarah, was already waiting in the virtual room. Beside her were 3 senior partners from Vanguard Horizon, which is one of the most aggressive and wealthy venture capital firms in the country. They were sitting in a sleek boardroom in Silicon Valley drinking espresso and waiting for me to arrive. For 4 long years, Marcus thought I was just playing on my computer. He thought I was messing around with a little tech hobby that bled our household finances dry. He genuinely believed his branch manager's salary was keeping a roof over my head. He was so completely and utterly blind. What he dismissed as a silly hobby was actually a revolutionary payment processing algorithm designed to detect institutional wire fraud in real time. I had built a security infrastructure that the corporate banking world wanted desperately. We had started the acquisition negotiations weeks ago at $22 million. That was the number I had initially anticipated. But the moment word leaked that Vanguard was making a serious offer, a massive bidding war erupted in the financial sector. 2 other major banking institutions jumped into the ring. They fought tooth and nail for exclusive rights to my software, driving the price higher and higher. And tonight was the grand finale. Sarah smiled through the screen. She looked at the wealthy investors, then looked directly into my camera. "They are ready to close, Nia," she said, her voice ringing with professional triumph. "The final offer is locked in, and the board has given unanimous approval. $40 million up front, plus a designated seat on their executive advisory board. I did not gasp. I did not cheer or jump out of my chair. I simply took a slow, deep breath and nodded. "Let us finalize the paperwork," I replied. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I reviewed the massive digital contracts with cold, calculated precision. The terms were absolutely flawless. I applied my encrypted electronic signature to the final acquisition agreement. Within seconds, a green confirmation banner popped up on my screen. The $40 million wire transfer had been officially initiated. But that massive fortune was not going into any regular bank account with my name on it. Weeks ago, I had instructed Sarah to establish an impenetrable blind trust. It was a financial fortress designed to protect high net worth individuals. The $40 million would flow directly into that trust, completely shielded from Marcus and entirely invisible to anyone running a standard marital asset check. Marcus had spent the last 3 weeks bragging to his mother about draining my checking account. He felt so incredibly powerful, stealing $3,000 from me to buy a Prada bag for Heather. He had absolutely no idea that the account he seized was literally a financial decoy. It was a tiny bucket of spare change I deliberately left behind to distract him while I quietly moved mountains behind his back. I watched the loading bar on the screen as the funds were officially verified and secured by the Federal Reserve. $40 million. I thought about the crumpled $5 bill sitting in my cheap grocery wallet. I thought about Brenda telling me to step back so my husband could shine. I thought about Kevin laughing at my allowance while secretly drowning in gambling debt. They thought they had buried me under their toxic expectations. They did not realize they had simply planted a seed that had just grown into an unstoppable empire. Sarah spoke again, breaking the quiet silence of my home office. "The transfer is complete, Nia," she said warmly. "Congratulations, you are officially a multimillionaire. And there is one more detail we finalized regarding the buyer. Vanguard Horizon recently acquired a controlling stake in the regional banking network here in Georgia, the exact same banking network where your husband works as a branch manager." A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. The glow of the laptop illuminated my expression. "Are you telling me that my new partners now own his bank?" I asked. Sarah nodded. Sarah: "Yes, Nia. As part of your new advisory board seat, you now have executive oversight over their regional management division. They want you to help audit their internal security protocols to test your software. You are officially your husband's ultimate boss." I closed my laptop. The screen went completely black, leaving me in the peaceful dark of my office. The sheer poetry of the situation was almost too perfect to believe. Marcus had spent years trying to convince me that I was a financial burden. He had committed federal wire fraud to steal my decoy money, thinking he was the smartest man in the room. He had publicly humiliated me for $85, and now I owned the very institution he worked for. I held his entire career, his freedom, and his reputation right in the palm of my hand. If he thought I was a burden before he was about to find out what it felt like to be completely crushed by my weight. I unlocked my office door and walked quietly back down the hallway to the master bedroom. Marcus was still snoring loudly, tangled in the expensive sheets that I had paid for. I stood at the foot of the bed and just watched him sleep. He looked so incredibly small to me now. He was a petty tyrant, ruling over a fake kingdom made of absolute dust. He thought his financial abuse was a chain around my neck. He thought he had trapped me in a life of submission. But tonight, I had just bought the entire bank, the entire corporate board, and the heavy iron keys to his future prison cell. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Tomorrow was the day he had his routine dental appointment. Tomorrow was the day I was going to pack my black suitcase, leave the $85 on the kitchen counter, and vanish into thin air. He was going to wake up feeling like a king, but by the time the sun set, he was going to realize he was completely and utterly ruined. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse law office, reflecting off the sleek glass conference table. I sat at the head of the table holding a heavy, luxury fountain pen. My lead attorney, Sarah, sat across from me, sliding a thick stack of paperwork across the smooth glass surface. Each document required my signature, and each one was stamped with a bright red official seal. As I signed my name over and over again, I felt a massive weight lifting off my shoulders. These were the final legally binding documents that officially transferred my entire $40 million tech buyout into the impenetrable blind trust we had established. But the tech money was only one piece of the puzzle. Today was about securing the ultimate weapon. It was time to pull the rug out from under Marcus and his fake real estate empire. Sarah opened a sleek black folder and spread a new set of documents across the glass table. These pertained to the massive 4-bedroom luxury home that Marcus currently treated like his own personal kingdom. He loved to parade his friends and family through those expensive hallways, bragging about how his hard work at the bank provided such a beautiful life for his wife. But the truth was buried deep in the fine print of our mortgage agreement. 3 years ago, when we first bought the property, Marcus had absolutely terrible credit. He had secretly taken out several highly questionable personal loans to bail Kevin out of previous gambling debts, severely damaging his own financial standing. To secure the premium mortgage rate for the house, I had to be the sole applicant. Marcus was so desperate to show off a luxury home to his mother Brenda that he did not care about the legalities. He foolishly signed a massive stack of liability waivers and a strict quitclaim deed. He voluntarily surrendered all legal rights to the property just so he could post photos of the manicured front lawn on social media and pretend he was a wealthy real estate mogul. He assumed that because we were married, the house was naturally half his. He was entirely wrong. I had originally placed the property under a standard limited liability company to protect my assets. But today I was signing the paperwork to completely transfer the ownership of that LLC directly into my new blind trust. Sarah pointed her manicured finger to the final signature line. Once you sign this document, Nia, the house is fully absorbed by the trust. She explained, her voice perfectly calm and professional. Marcus has absolutely no marital claim to it. In the eyes of the law, he is not a homeowner and he is not a landlord. He is simply a month-to-month tenant living in a property owned by a massive corporate entity. And because he has not personally paid a single dime toward the actual mortgage in 4 years, he is technically a tenant in default. I smiled and signed the document with a satisfying flourish. The trap was perfectly set. But Sarah was not finished. She slid one final crisp white document across the glass table. It was a formal eviction notice. It gave the unauthorized occupant of the property exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises due to non-payment of rent and breach of contract. It already bore the official signature of a local judge and the heavy embossed seal of the county sheriff department. Right as I picked up my pen to sign the bottom of the eviction notice, my phone buzzed loudly against the glass table. The screen lit up with a text message from Marcus. He was sitting at his desk at his mediocre branch manager job, entirely unaware that his wife now owned the bank he worked for and the ground he slept on. I glanced down at the screen. The message read, "Make sure you use that allowance money I gave you to pick up my dry cleaning this afternoon, and do not forget to ask the cashier for a paper receipt so I can verify your spending. I want my blue suit ready for a meeting tomorrow." I stared at the text message. The sheer audacity of his petty financial control was almost comical now. He was demanding a printed receipt for $20 worth of dry cleaning, while I was sitting in a high-rise law firm, locking away a $40 million fortune. I did not reply to his message. Instead, I looked back down at the legal paperwork and confidently signed my name at the very bottom of his official eviction notice. Sarah gathered the signed folders and locked them inside her leather briefcase. She then reached into her pocket and handed me a small encrypted flash drive. This drive contained the complete forensic audit of Marcus bank transfers. Every single wire fraud transaction, every stolen dollar funneled to Kevin, every fake ledger entry Marcus had created to hide his tracks was perfectly documented and verified. It amounted to 72 separate counts of federal wire fraud and illegal structuring. Sarah had already forwarded a duplicate copy of this exact drive to the federal authorities and to the internal compliance board of Vanguard Horizon, the company that now owned Marcus Bank. The legal curtain had officially dropped. The trap was not just set, it was completely welded shut. I thanked Sarah, shook her hand, and took the private elevator down to the lobby. I stepped out into the warm Atlanta air, feeling completely invincible. But I still had one more day to play my part. I drove my car to the cheap discount grocery store and bought the generic brand chicken breasts Marcus demanded for dinner. I drove to the dry cleaners and picked up his blue suit, making sure to ask the clerk for a printed paper receipt just like he ordered. I was completely at peace. The severe anxiety that had choked me for the past 4 years was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculated patience. When I served him dinner that night, he sat at the head of the dining table and immediately complained that the chicken was too dry. He chewed loudly and shook his head, looking at me with absolute disappointment. I immediately apologized, looked down at my plate, and promised to do much better next time. He smugly reminded me that I needed to respect the $85 allowance he had so generously provided, and that poor cooking was a waste of his hard-earned money. I just nodded and quietly agreed with him. I looked at him sitting there in his expensive dress shirt. He was eating dinner in a house he no longer owned. He was working for a banking institution I now controlled. He was facing decades in federal prison for crimes I had already reported, and he was arrogant enough to believe he was completely in charge. He felt like an absolute king ruling over a kingdom made of nothing but dust and lies. After dinner, I washed the dishes while he loudly watched a basketball game on the living room television. I dried my hands, walked quietly into the laundry room, and pulled my heavy black suitcase down from the top shelf. I wiped the dust off the top and unzipped the main compartment. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Tomorrow he had his routine dental appointment in the late morning. Tomorrow I would pack this suitcase, leave the crumpled $85 on the marble kitchen island, and walk out the front door forever. The stage was perfectly set, and the greatest performance of my life was about to reach its final explosive act. Wednesday morning arrived like a breath of fresh, cool air after years of suffocating heat. Marcus woke up early, complaining loudly about his scheduled dental appointment. He paced around the kitchen, sipping his coffee and grumbling about the terrible traffic he was going to face on his way to the clinic. I stood by the stove, calmly flipping a generic brand pancake and agreeing with every single complaint he made. I poured his orange juice, I ironed his collar, and I handed him his briefcase, just like the perfect, obedient wife I was pretending to be. Before he walked out the door, he stopped and looked at me. His expression was a mix of arrogance and absolute control. "Do not forget to use that $85 to pick up my dry cleaning this afternoon," he reminded me, tapping his watch. "And make sure the house is spotless. I want to relax when I get home." I nodded sweetly, offering him a gentle smile. "Do not worry, Marcus," I replied. "Everything will be exactly as it should be." He kissed my cheek, a dry, patronizing peck, and walked out to his car. I stood at the large bay window in the living room, watching his luxury sedan back out of the driveway. The moment his taillights disappeared around the corner, the sweet, submissive smile completely dropped from my face. I looked down at my watch. I had exactly 3 hours before he returned. 3 hours to erase my entire existence from this house. I moved with the swift, calculated precision of a military operation. I jogged up the stairs to the master bedroom and pulled my heavy black suitcase from the closet. The wheels clattered against the hardwood floor, an exciting sound that signaled my impending freedom. I opened the large walk-in closet and began taking down my clothes. I did not fold anything perfectly. I did not take time to reminisce over old outfits. I grabbed handfuls of dresses, blouses, and slacks and threw them directly into the suitcase. I cleared out my shoes, my designer handbags, and every piece of jewelry I owned. I left Marcus' side of the closet completely untouched. His expensive suits, his perfectly polished dress shoes, and his ridiculous collection of silk ties remained hanging there like a museum exhibit dedicated to a fraudulent king. I moved to the master bathroom and swept my expensive skincare products, my makeup, and my perfumes straight into a black duffel bag. Within 20 minutes, the entire vanity was stripped bare. I walked down the hallway to my home office. This was the room where the real magic had happened. I packed my laptops, my encrypted hard drives, and the manila folders containing all the final legal documents from Sarah. I unplugged my monitors and packed the power cords, leaving only the heavy mahogany desk and the empty leather chair. I stood in the doorway for a brief second, looking at the space where I had quietly built a $40 million empire right under his nose. I turned off the light and closed the door firmly. The house was becoming increasingly quiet as the physical evidence of my presence slowly disappeared. I carried my bags downstairs and lined them up neatly by the front door. The private black SUV I had scheduled the night before was already waiting, idling quietly in the driveway. The driver, a large professional-looking man, stepped out and helped me load my luggage into the spacious trunk. There was only one final task left to complete. I walked back into the kitchen, where the smell of the generic pancakes still lingered faintly in the air. I reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out the crumpled $5 bill and the 4 crisp 20s Marcus had handed me on Sunday. The $85 allowance that was supposed to keep me trapped. The absolute insult that had given me the clarity to destroy him. I did not leave the money on the marble island this time. I wanted him to see it when he was forced to look directly at his own reflection. I walked into the downstairs powder room, the one he always used immediately after walking through the front door. I pulled a roll of clear tape from a drawer and perfectly centered the $85 flat against the large vanity mirror. I took a thick black marker and wrote directly on the glass surface right above the cash. "Here is your rent money for the month. Do not spend it all in one place. Good luck." The black ink stood out sharply against the mirrored glass. It was a masterpiece of poetic justice. I stared at the message, making sure the letters were bold and clear. I walked out of the bathroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. I did not break a single plate. I did not tear up any of his clothes. I did not leave a long emotional letter detailing my pain. True power does not require a dramatic tantrum. True power is cold, silent, and absolute. I walked to the front door and stepped outside, locking the heavy deadbolt behind me. The crisp morning air hit my face and I took a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in 4 years, I felt incredibly light. I slid into the plush leather seat of the waiting SUV, and the driver gently closed the door. As the car rolled slowly down the street, I looked out the tinted window at the beautiful house I had bought. The house that Marcus thought was his kingdom. The house he was about to be legally evicted from in exactly 48 hours. I leaned my head back against the seat and poured myself a chilled glass of expensive champagne from the console. My phone was completely silent. He was probably sitting in the dentist chair right now, completely relaxed, complaining to the hygienist about the cost of groceries. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the bubbling champagne. My new life had officially begun, and Marcus' nightmare was just minutes away from starting. I watched the digital clock on the dashboard tick forward. In about 45 minutes, he would pull into the driveway. He would walk through the door. He would call my name, expecting his submissive wife to greet him. And he would be met with nothing but devastating, absolute silence. The private black SUV navigated through the heavy Atlanta traffic and pulled up to a towering glass high-rise in the exclusive Buckhead district. The uniformed doorman greeted me respectfully by name and held the heavy glass doors open. I walked into the pristine marble lobby and took the private elevator straight to the top floor. The steel doors slid open silently, revealing a sprawling luxury penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city skyline. This was my new sanctuary. It was completely paid for in cash by my blind trust. I walked over to the sleek modern wet bar and poured myself a generous glass of deep red Cabernet. I set my phone down on the smooth kitchen island. The screen was completely dark. It was exactly 12:15 in the afternoon. He was home. 10 minutes later, the screen illuminated the dark countertop. It was him. I did not answer. The phone vibrated aggressively against the marble for a full minute before going dark. Then it immediately started buzzing again. He was relentless. I stood by the massive windows looking down at the tiny cars crawling along the city streets, and I pictured the exact scene unfolding miles away in the suburbs. I imagined Marcus unlocking the front door, expecting the smell of generic brand chicken or cheap pasta. I imagined him dropping his briefcase in the foyer and walking into the downstairs powder room to wash his hands. And I imagined the exact moment he froze, completely paralyzed, as he saw his crumpled $85 taped to the mirror right beneath my handwritten message. The reality of that black marker must have hit his massive ego like a physical blow to the chest. The missed call counter on my phone screen began to climb rapidly. 5, 12, 28, 45. He was calling back to back without pausing for a single breath. The phone vibrated across the island like a dying insect trying to escape. I took a slow sip of my wine and watched the numbers climb higher. 52, 64, 73. Then the frantic calls finally stopped, and the voicemails started coming through one by one. I casually walked back to the kitchen island, tapped the screen, and put the first voicemail on speakerphone. His voice filled my quiet, elegant penthouse. "Nia, where the hell are you? This is not funny. I just walked in and your closet is completely empty. If you are trying to make some kind of sick point, you have exactly 10 minutes to get your car back in this driveway, or I am locking the doors for good. You hear me? Call me back right now." He sounded annoyed, but he was still trying to play the tough, unbothered patriarch. He still genuinely thought this was a temporary tantrum from a defeated woman. I swiped my finger across the glass screen and played the next voicemail. The tone had completely shifted. He was breathing heavily, and I could clearly hear the sound of things crashing in the background. "Nia, pick up the damn phone right now. What is this note? What do you mean, rent money? You do not have a single dime to your name. How did you even afford a cab? I am calling the police and reporting you missing if you do not answer me." I walked over to the massive white leather sofa and sat down, crossing my legs comfortably. I tapped play on the third message. Now his voice was pure, unhinged rage. He was no longer the composed bank manager. He was a terrified tyrant losing control of his only prisoner. "You think you can just leave me, after everything I have done to provide for you?" I heard the unmistakable sound of thick glass shattering over the audio. It sounded like he had just kicked over the expensive crystal coffee table in the living room. The heavy thud of a framed picture hitting the hardwood floor followed immediately. "I took your accounts because you are reckless. You are nothing without me. Do you hear me? Nothing. I will sue you for abandonment. I will take half of that pathetic little tech startup of yours and I will completely liquidate it. I will leave you on the street begging me for that $85. A genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest and echoed in the quiet, pristine room. I simply could not hold it in. The absolute delusion of this man was staggering to witness. He was standing in a house he did not legally own, throwing a violent temper tantrum and smashing furniture that I had paid for. He was threatening to take half of a company that had just been sold for $40 million and safely hidden inside an impenetrable federal trust. He was acting like a wounded, cornered animal caught in a brutal trap of his own making. The final voicemail was the longest and the most desperate. He was screaming so loudly the microphone on his phone was horribly distorting his words. "You are a deadbeat wife, Nia. You are ungrateful and pathetic. I am the branch manager of a major regional bank, and you are just a failed entrepreneur playing on a computer. I am going to completely ruin your life. I am going to call my lawyers right now and freeze every single asset you think you have. I am cutting off your credit cards completely. You are never seeing a single dollar of my money ever again. Good luck buying food tonight, you crazy woman." The audio cut out with a sharp beep, leaving the penthouse in total silence once again. I smiled warmly and pressed the delete button, wiping his toxic voice from my phone completely. He wanted to call his lawyers. He wanted to freeze my assets. He wanted to cut off my credit cards. That was incredibly amusing, considering he was about to find out that his own financial world was already evaporating into thin air. I leaned back into the soft leather cushions and took another slow sip of my wine. The blind panic in his voice was absolutely delicious, but the real show had not even started yet. Because right after he finished leaving those unhinged voicemails, he was undoubtedly going to pull out his laptop or log into his precious banking app to try and lock my accounts, just like he threatened. He was going to try and assert his dominance one last time, and when he did, he was going to discover a very unpleasant surprise waiting for him. The federal authorities and the internal bank auditors moved incredibly fast when wire fraud was involved. The trap was springing shut around him, and there was absolutely no way out. I sat at the smooth marble island in my penthouse, opening my sleek silver laptop. The screen illuminated my face as I logged into my securely encrypted email client. Sarah had already prepared the specific data packets for me. I attached the massive forensic accounting file containing all 72 counts of wire fraud. I typed in the direct email address for the IRS whistleblower office. I knew that under federal tax law, reporting massive financial fraud would not only trigger an immediate investigation, but would also legally entitle me to a percentage of whatever penalties they recovered. It was the ultimate financial checkmate. In the copy line, I added the Executive Compliance Department for Vanguard Horizon. I rested my index finger on the smooth glass trackpad. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pressed send. The small whoosh sound of the email departing from my outbox felt like a heavy steel vault door locking firmly into place. Miles away in the suburbs, Marcus was standing in the middle of our ruined living room. He had just finished destroying the expensive crystal coffee table and leaving his unhinged voicemails on my phone. He was breathing heavily, his tailored suit jacket thrown carelessly onto the hardwood floor. He pulled out his phone and opened his employee banking portal. He was determined to make good on his aggressive threat to freeze my assets and completely ruin my life. He typed in his administrative branch manager credentials, expecting to see my decoy checking account pop up on the screen so he could lock me out of the remaining $85. But the dashboard did not load. Instead, a bright red error message flashed aggressively across his screen. It simply read, "Administrative access permanently revoked pending internal review." Marcus frowned, tapping the screen with a sweaty finger. He assumed it was a simple network glitch or a temporary server outage. He backed out of the employee portal and logged directly into his personal retail banking application to check his own balances. The screen loaded slowly, but every single number was entirely gone, replaced by a series of solid gray dashes. His primary checking account, his savings account, his premium travel credit cards, and even his corporate retirement portfolio all displayed the exact same terrifying status. Account frozen pending federal compliance investigation. His heart dropped completely into his stomach. The room began to spin around him. He quickly pulled his premium platinum credit card from his leather wallet and dialed the elite customer service number listed on the back. A representative answered almost immediately, but her tone was incredibly cold and strictly professional. She informed him that his accounts were under an active federal hold mandated by the IRS and the Internal Audit Division of Vanguard Horizon. She told him he was strictly prohibited from making any withdrawals or transfers. Before he could even yell at her, she calmly added that corporate security personnel were currently waiting for him at his branch office to permanently confiscate his company electronics and his security badge. Marcus dropped his premium credit card onto the floor. The reality of the situation crashed over him like a freezing tidal wave. He was not just broke. He was a prime suspect in a major federal investigation. He immediately picked up his phone and dialed Kevin. He needed to know if the offshore accounts were still active. The phone rang 3 times before his brother finally picked up. Kevin did not even say hello. He was hyperventilating, and the shrill sound of Heather screaming could be heard clearly in the background. "Marcus, what the hell did you do?" Kevin screamed into the phone, his voice cracking with pure terror. "I just tried to buy gas and my debit card was declined. I logged into my app and everything is gone, Marcus. Every single account is completely locked. Even the hidden offshore sports betting accounts are frozen solid. Did you get caught? Did you leave a paper trail, you absolute idiot? Marcus felt his chest tighten, making it incredibly hard to breathe. Calm down, Kevin, he snapped desperately, trying to maintain his authority even as his entire fake empire collapsed. It is just a temporary audit. I am a branch manager, and I know how these systems work. I can fix this. I just need you to wire me whatever cash you have stashed at your house right now so I can hire a criminal defense attorney. We need to get our stories straight before the auditors start asking questions. Are you completely out of your mind, Marcus? Kevin yelled back, his voice echoing with absolute panic. I do not have any cash. The bookies are literally driving through my neighborhood right now in a black sedan looking for me. You promised me those transfers were completely untraceable. You said you used your administrative override to hide the money so nobody would ever know. Now, Heather is frantically packing her bags because the bank fraud department just called our home phone looking for me. They told her I am an accessory to wire fraud. Suddenly, the phone was snatched away and Heather's piercing voice shattered my husband's eardrum. You arrogant, manipulative piece of garbage! Heather screamed, her voice dripping with pure venom. You told us you were helping Kevin out of the goodness of your heart. You used us to launder your stolen money. The fraud investigator told me the money came directly from Nia personal accounts. You stole from your own wife and dragged my husband into a federal crime just to cover your tracks. Listen to me, Heather, Marcus pleaded, trying to lower his voice. We are family. We have to stick together on this. If we turn on each other, we are all going to prison. Do not you ever call me family! Heather shrieked. You ruined my life. I am calling the police myself, and I am telling them absolutely everything I know about your little banking scheme. I am handing over all of Kevin's bank statements to the feds. I am filing for divorce this afternoon, and I am making sure you both rot in a federal prison cell. The line went completely dead, leaving a hollow dial tone ringing in Marcus' ear. Marcus stood entirely alone in the wrecked living room, the phone slipping from his sweaty grip and clattering against the floorboards. The toxic family alliance was completely shattered. His family, the exact same people who had laughed at my $85 allowance and cheered on his arrogant dominance, were now aggressively tearing each other apart just to save themselves. There was absolutely no loyalty among thieves. Brenda could not shield him from the federal government. Kevin was clearly preparing to testify against him to save his own skin, and Heather was ready to throw them both to the wolves just to avoid being implicated in the theft that bought her designer bags. Back in my penthouse, I poured myself another half glass of Cabernet. My laptop chimed with a soft, pleasant tone. It was an automated read receipt from the Vanguard Horizon Compliance Department, followed immediately by a confirmation email from the IRS whistleblower office. The emails had been successfully opened. The attachments were currently being reviewed by federal agents. Divine justice was no longer just a distant concept. It was a perfectly executed mathematical equation, and I had calculated every single variable with absolute precision. Marcus wanted to be the undisputed ruler of our finances. He wanted me to beg for pennies while he played the role of a wealthy king. Now he was going to learn exactly what happens when the bank truly owns your entire life. He had 72 counts of federal wire fraud hanging directly over his head and absolutely no money to hire a lawyer to defend him. The man who handed me $85 to survive on for 3 weeks was currently standing in a house he was about to be evicted from with a net worth of absolute zero and a family that hated him. I looked out over the beautiful Atlanta skyline, taking a deep breath of the cool air. The trap had officially snapped shut, crushing everything he loved in a matter of minutes. Exactly 1 month had passed since the day I taped those $85 to the bathroom mirror. The fallout from the federal wire fraud investigation had been swift and absolutely merciless. Vanguard Horizon had immediately terminated Marcus and handed all internal audits directly over to the authorities. The eviction notice on our luxury home had been executed flawlessly by the county sheriff, leaving Marcus with nowhere to go except his mother's damp basement. Kevin and Marcus were currently drowning in legal fees, waiting for their federal indictments to process. And yet, despite their entire world burning to the ground, their staggering arrogance, somehow remained completely intact. I sat comfortably in a plush leather chair inside the largest conference room of my attorney high-rise law firm. The massive glass table stretched across the room, gleaming under the modern overhead lights. The air in the room was thick and heavy, smelling faintly of expensive coffee and the unmistakable metaphorical scent of gunpowder. The final battle was about to begin. If a camera were sliding slowly along the length of that long conference table, it would capture a perfect portrait of sheer desperation masked by toxic pride. I looked calmly across the glass surface, studying the tense faces of my enemies. First, there was Marcus. He sat in the center, trying desperately to project his usual aura of dominance. But his blue suit, the exact same suit he had ordered me to pick up from the dry cleaners a month ago, hung loosely on his frame. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights he had spent tossing and turning on a cheap air mattress in Brenda basement. He was a broken man pretending to still wear a crown. To his right sat his mother, Brenda. Her face was pinched with sour indignation, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She glared at me, as if I was a disobedient child who needed a severe reprimand. She still believed her son was a golden child who could do absolutely no wrong. To his left was Kevin. He looked like a cornered rat, constantly bouncing his knee against the table leg and chewing nervously on his bottom lip. He was terrified of the federal charges hanging over his head, but he was too dependent on his brother to stay away. He kept glancing at the heavy oak doors of the conference room, as if federal agents were about to burst through at any second. And finally, sitting at the far end of their side of the table was Heather. Despite screaming at Kevin on the phone a month ago and threatening an immediate divorce, she was still sitting right next to him. She had clearly realized that Kevin had absolutely no money to give her in a divorce settlement, so she was placing all her bets on Marcus winning a massive payout from me. She sat with her chin tilted upward, clutching that stolen $3,000 Prada bag tightly on her lap, as if it was her only remaining source of dignity. Marcus had brought a cheap discount attorney named Mr. Higgins. The man wore a shiny polyester suit and looked completely out of his depth, sitting across from Sarah and her team of elite corporate sharks. Higgins nervously cleared his throat, opened a thin manila folder, and began to read their ridiculous opening demands. "We are here today to finalize the dissolution of this marriage." Higgins stammered slightly, intimidated by the cold silence on our side of the table. "My client, Mr. Marcus Wilson, is seeking a 50% division of all marital assets, including Mrs. Wilson Technology Startup. Furthermore, due to her sudden abandonment and the resulting financial hardship, my client is demanding monthly spousal support and an additional $500,000 in compensatory damages for severe emotional distress." I did not blink. I did not laugh. I just let the silence stretch out, making them sweat. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the glass table. He smirked, thinking my silence was a sign of fear. "You thought you could just run away and hide, Nia," he said, his voice dripping with that same old toxic condescension. "You thought you could leave me a pathetic little note on the mirror and take everything. But the law does not work like that. I am your husband. I supported you for 4 years while you played on your computer. I put food on the table. I built you up, and I deserve half of whatever that silly little application of yours is worth. You are going to pay me for the massive damage you have caused my life." Before I could even respond, Brenda eagerly jumped into the conversation, pointing a wrinkled finger directly at my face. "You are a vindictive, hateful woman, Nia." She spat, her eyes narrowing. "You called the bank and told them horrible lies to get my son suspended. You manipulated the deed to his own house and pushed him out onto the street like a stray dog. You owe him for the trauma you have caused this family. You owe us a public apology, and you owe him his fair share of the money." Heather nodded vigorously, her cheap blonde hair bouncing around her shoulders. "Yes, you do," Heather agreed loudly, patting the stolen Prada bag on her lap. "Kevin and I have suffered immense emotional distress because of your dramatic little temper tantrum. We have been harassed by bank investigators for weeks, and my husband cannot even sleep at night. We expect our legal fees to be covered entirely out of your settlement pocket. It is the absolute least you can do for tearing this family apart. The absolute audacity of these people was truly breathtaking. They were sitting at an active crime scene of their own, demanding that I compensate them for the consequences of their own felonies. They still viewed me as the weak, submissive woman standing in the grocery store begging for $4. They had absolutely no idea that the woman sitting across from them was a corporate titan with a net worth of $40 million and total executive control over their entire financial reality. I looked at Sarah, who offered me a razor-thin smile. She did not interrupt them. She had instructed me to let them talk, to let them dig their hole as deep as they possibly could before we buried them completely. "Are you finished, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly flat. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms confidently. "I will be finished when you sign the paperwork handing over my half of the company," he demanded. "And I want the keys to my house back by the end of the week so I can get my life back to normal." I nodded slowly, turning my attention to his cheap lawyer. "Mr. Higgins," I said softly, "has your client informed you about the exact nature of my technology startup? Has he mentioned what the software actually does?" Higgins looked confused and shuffled his papers. He indicated it was a small application for personal budget tracking, Mrs. Wilson. I smiled a cold, terrifying smile that instantly wiped the arrogant smirk right off Marcus' face. "No, Mr. Higgins," I corrected him. "It is a highly advanced institutional security algorithm designed specifically to detect, prevent, and report federal wire fraud in real time. And it is not a small application. It is the exact software that was just purchased for $40 million by Vanguard Horizon." The entire room went dead silent. The color drained completely out of Marcus' face. Brenda's jaw dropped open, and Heather's grip on her Prada bag visibly loosened. I leaned forward, resting my hands perfectly flat on the glass table, staring directly into Marcus' terrified eyes. "And I think it is time we discuss exactly where the money for that Prada bag came from, do not you?" Sarah opened her sleek leather briefcase with a satisfying click that echoed in the silent room. She pulled out a thick stack of bank statements highlighted in bright fluorescent yellow. With a single elegant motion, she slid the documents across the smooth glass table. They glided perfectly, stopping right in front of Heather and Kevin. I did not break eye contact with Marcus as I began to speak. My voice was perfectly calm, projecting clearly across the massive conference room. "3 weeks ago, Marcus decided to seize control of my personal checking account," I said. "He told everyone in this family that I was financially reckless. He handed me $85 in front of all of you and told me it was for my own good. You all laughed. You all thought he was being such a strong, responsible man taking charge of his household." Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes darting nervously between Marcus and the highlighted documents. "What does this have to do with anything?" she snapped, though her voice completely lacked its usual venomous authority. She was starting to realize that the ground beneath her was crumbling. "It has absolutely everything to do with it, Brenda," I replied, turning my gaze directly to her. "Because your golden child did not take my money to protect our family budget. He stole my money to protect Kevin." Kevin flinched violently as if he had just been physically struck. He tried to push his heavy chair back away from the table, but Heather grabbed his arm. Her eyes were locked onto the bank statement sitting directly in front of her. She could see her own name printed on the transaction logs. "Let us look at page 4, I instructed smoothly. Mr. Higgins nervously leaned over, adjusting his glasses to look at the papers. "You will see a series of unauthorized administrative transfers made by Marcus from my decoy account. He bypassed internal bank security protocols to move exactly $3,000 into a hidden offshore account, an account belonging exclusively to Kevin. He did this to pay off a violent bookie because Kevin is $50,000 in debt from illegal sports betting." Heather let out a sharp, trembling gasp. $50,000! She whispered, her face turning entirely pale. She slowly turned her head to look at Kevin. He was sweating profusely, staring down at his lap, and completely refusing to meet her eyes. But Kevin is not just a severe gambling addict, I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy tension in the room. He is also incredibly careless. He withdrew that $3,000 in cash, but before he could pay his bookie, he left the envelope sitting in his home office desk drawer. Is that not right, Kevin? Kevin swallowed hard, his chest heaving. He looked like he was going to be sick right there on the expensive glass table. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I turned my attention entirely to Heather. She was staring at me, her knuckles completely white as she gripped the handles of her designer bag. You found that envelope, Heather. Kevin told you it was a surprise bonus from his job. And you took that stolen cash straight to the luxury mall to buy that exact Prada bag sitting on your lap. The same bag you paraded around the bank lobby while you publicly lectured me about being a submissive wife. The same bag you bragged about at the Sunday barbecue while you laughed at my crumpled $5 bill. Heather looked down at the Prada bag as if it had suddenly caught fire. She shoved it off her lap in pure disgust. The heavy metal hardware clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. That is an absolute lie, Brenda shouted, slamming her wrinkled hand against the glass table. My boys are good men. Marcus is a highly respected branch manager. He provides for his family. He would never steal from his own wife. He is a former branch manager, Brenda. I corrected her swiftly, my tone completely devoid of mercy. And he did steal. He committed federal wire fraud. Those financial documents you are looking at have already been thoroughly verified by the Internal Audit Division of Vanguard Horizon, the exact same company that I now help run. The federal authorities are already processing the criminal indictments for both of your sons as we speak. Heather slowly stood up from her chair. The sheer arrogant entitlement that usually painted her face had been completely erased, replaced by an absolute unhinged fury. She looked down at Kevin, who was cowering away from her. Is it true? She demanded, her voice shaking with rage. Tell me right now, Kevin. Are we $50,000 in debt? Did you let me walk around carrying a bag bought with stolen money while federal agents were building a case against us? Heather, baby, please. Kevin whimpered, raising his hands in a pathetic attempt to defend himself from his wife. I was going to win it back. I had a sure thing. I just needed a little more time, and Marcus was helping me fix it. Helping you? Heather shrieked, the sound piercing the quiet professional atmosphere of the law firm. He dragged us into a massive federal crime. She did not hesitate for a single second. Heather lunged forward and swung her arm with everything she had. The sound of her open palm connecting with Kevin's cheek was like a loud gunshot echoing off the glass walls. The slap was so incredibly violent, it knocked Kevin's heavy glasses completely off his face, sending them skittering across the table. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic gasp of pure horror, clutching her chest, as if she was experiencing a massive heart attack. Heather! Have you completely lost your mind? Brenda screamed, rushing out of her chair to check on Kevin. You do not ever put your hands on my son. But Heather was nowhere near done. She turned her blazing, furious eyes directly onto Marcus. And you, she spat, pointing an accusing finger at his face. You arrogant, manipulative piece of garbage. You sat at your mother's dining table acting like you were the king of the world. You made us laugh at Nia while you were secretly laundering money and completely ruining our lives. You used us as a human shield. Marcus opened his mouth to defend himself, but he had absolutely nothing to say. His confident facade had completely shattered. His cheap lawyer, Mr. Higgins, was already quietly packing his files back into his briefcase, clearly realizing he had just walked into a federal nightmare that he was definitely not being paid enough to handle. I sat back comfortably in my plush leather chair and crossed my legs. If a camera had been slowly moving toward my face at that exact moment, it would have captured the most radiant, peaceful smile I had ever worn in my entire life. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to throw a tantrum. The toxic alliance that had bullied me, belittled me, and tried to strip me of my human dignity was currently tearing itself apart right in front of my eyes. They were screaming, crying, and physically attacking each other over the exact crimes I had meticulously exposed. They had confidently walked into this room demanding emotional damages. They had demanded monthly spousal support. They had demanded half of my fortune, believing I was still the weak woman they could easily manipulate. But all they were getting today was the absolute undeniable truth. And that truth was destroying their entire world faster than I ever could have imagined. I took a slow, deep breath, soaking in the beautiful scent of their absolute defeat. The first bomb had successfully detonated, and they had no idea I was about to drop the second one. The sharp echo of Heather slapping Kevin hung in the air for several long seconds. Nobody moved. Heather did not say another word. She simply reached down, snatched her stolen Prada bag off the hardwood floor, and marched straight out of the conference room. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, signaling the absolute end of Kevin's marriage. Kevin buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking silently, as the reality of his $50,000 debt and his impending federal indictment crushed him completely. Brenda was hyperventilating, clutching the edge of the glass table and staring at the empty space where Heather had just been standing. But Marcus was not ready to surrender. His entire identity was built on the desperate need to dominate and control. Even as his family shattered into pieces around him, he tried to salvage his broken pride. He pushed himself up from his chair and slammed both of his hands flat against the glass table. He leaned forward, his eyes wild and completely bloodshot. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Nia," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You think because you manipulated your little tech company and got me suspended from the bank that you have completely won. You think you can just embarrass me in front of my mother and ruin my brother's life. But you forgot one massive detail. I am still your husband, and I still control our primary assets." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my posture perfectly relaxed. "Is that so, Marcus?" I asked softly. He sneered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Yes, it is. You might have your hidden trust fund, but you abandoned our marital home. That house belongs to me. It is a premium 4-bedroom luxury property in one of the best neighborhoods in Atlanta. I changed the locks the exact same day you walked out. You are permanently banned from stepping foot on my property. And since you want to play dirty, I am going to immediately list that house for sale. I will take the $500,000 in equity, and I will use it to hire the best criminal defense team in the entire state. I will drag this divorce out for a decade, and I will make your life a living hell." Brenda nodded vigorously, her tear-streaked face suddenly filling with renewed hope. "That is right, Marcus," she encouraged him, her voice trembling but defiant. "You sell that beautiful house. You take everything the law allows you to take. She cannot just walk away and leave you with nothing. You are the man of the house." I looked at Sarah, my attorney. She did not even try to hide her amusement. She casually reached into her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a single black folder. She placed it carefully on the glass table right in front of her. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound was incredibly out of place in the tense conference room, but I simply could not contain it. "You really love that house, do you not, Marcus?" I said, my tone shifting from professional to dangerously cold. "You love walking around those Brazilian oak floors pretending you are a real estate mogul. You love hosting your Sunday barbecues and bragging to your friends about the luxurious life you supposedly provided for me. It is my house," he spat back, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. Sarah opened the black folder. With a swift, elegant motion, she slid a crisp white document across the long glass table. If a camera were filming this exact moment, it would have started with a tight focus on the heavy red seal stamped at the top of the page before panning rapidly to capture the absolute horror draining the color from Marcus' face. The document slid to a perfect stop right over his highlighted bank statements. He looked down at it. His eyes darted rapidly across the legal text, trying to make sense of the heavy legal jargon. "Let us take a quick trip down memory lane, Marcus," I said, leaning forward and resting my chin on my folded hands. "3 years ago, when we found that beautiful house, we went to the bank to secure a premium mortgage. But there was a massive problem. Your credit score was absolutely abysmal. You had secretly taken out multiple high-interest personal loans to bail Kevin out of his previous gambling debts. The bank laughed at your financial profile. They told us that if your name was anywhere on the mortgage application, we would be denied instantly. Marcus stared at the paper, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. He remembered. So to get the house, you had to completely remove yourself from the equation. I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. You were so desperate to secure that luxury property, so you could show off to your mother, that you blindly signed a massive stack of liability waivers. You signed a strict quit-claim deed. You voluntarily surrendered all marital and legal rights to the property just so you could post pictures of the front lawn on social media. I was the sole applicant, and I did not put the deed in my personal name. Mr. Higgins. Marcus' chief defense attorney leaned over to look at the document. He let out a heavy, defeated sigh and slowly took his glasses off his face. I placed the deed entirely under a limited liability company, I explained, watching Marcus slowly begin to suffocate under the weight of his own ignorance. A company that I owned entirely. But last month, when I finalized my corporate buyout, I had Sarah transfer the ownership of that LLC directly into my federal blind trust. Brenda stood up from her chair, her hands shaking violently. That is illegal, she screamed, pointing at Sarah. That is a marital home. You cannot just steal a man's house out from under him. You are a crooked lawyer. Sarah looked up at Brenda with eyes as cold as absolute zero. It is perfectly legal, ma'am, Sarah replied, her voice sharp and uncompromising. Your son signed the quitclaim deed of his own free will in front of a licensed notary. In the eyes of the state of Georgia, Mr. Marcus Wilson does not own a single piece of real estate. He is legally classified as a month-to-month tenant, residing in a property owned by a corporate trust. And unfortunately for him, his tenancy has just been officially terminated. I reached into my own designer bag and pulled out one final piece of paper. This one was printed on thick, official county stock. It featured the embossed seal of the local housing authority and the bold, unmistakable signature of the county sheriff. I stood up from my chair and tossed it effortlessly across the glass table. It landed right on top of Marcus' hands. What is this? Marcus whispered, his voice completely hollow. All the aggressive bravado had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, hollow shell of a man. That is your official eviction notice, I answered cheerfully. You see, Marcus, you have not personally contributed a single dollar to the mortgage of that property in 4 years. Your rent is severely past due. The judge completely agreed with our assessment. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises. If you are still inside that house by Friday morning, the county sheriff will arrive to physically remove you, and all of your belongings will be dragged out to the curb. Marcus stared at the bold black letters of the eviction notice. 48 hours. He was not going to sell the house. He was not going to get $500,000 in equity to pay for his federal criminal defense. He had absolutely nothing. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with devastating force. He was a fired bank manager actively under federal indictment for 72 counts of wire fraud. His brother was turning against him. His sister-in-law was cooperating with the police. His bank accounts were completely frozen, and now he was officially a homeless man. Mr. Higgins suddenly stood up and loudly snapped his briefcase shut. The sound made Kevin jump in his seat. I apologize, Mr. Wilson. Higgins said, his tone entirely devoid of sympathy. But given the revelation of these active federal indictments and the complete lack of liquid assets to secure my retainer, I am officially withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately. I highly suggest you seek a public defender for your upcoming criminal arraignment. Higgins did not wait for a response. He turned around and walked briskly out of the conference room, desperate to distance himself from the toxic radioactive wreckage of the Wilson family. Marcus sat perfectly still, staring blankly at the glass table. The man who had confidently handed me a crumpled $5 bill and told me it was my allowance for the week was now facing a life behind bars without a single dollar to his name. Brenda collapsed back into her chair, sobbing loudly and clutching her chest. She looked at her golden child, her perfect provider, and finally saw him for exactly what he was: a complete failure. I remained standing looking down at them. You wanted total financial control, Marcus. I said, my voice soft but piercing. You wanted to manage the household. Well, you got exactly what you asked for. The $85 I taped to the mirror is officially your last remaining asset. I suggest you use it to hire a moving truck because on Friday morning my property management team is changing the locks. I turned my back on the completely shattered family and walked out of the conference room. I did not need to hear another word. The war was officially over, and the absolute silence of their defeat was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. My hand was resting heavily on the cool metal of the conference room doorknob when his voice violently shattered the silence. "Wait!" Marcus roared. His chair scraped aggressively against the hardwood floor as he shoved himself up. I stopped, but I did not turn around immediately. I let him speak. I let him dig the very last inch of his own grave. "Even if you take the house, I still have my career," he shouted, his voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. "I am a highly respected branch manager with a six-figure salary. The bank suspended me pending an investigation, but they have no solid proof of anything. I will clear my name. I have a massive professional network. I will rent a luxury apartment by the weekend, and I will rebuild my entire life. You got lucky with one stupid tech deal, Nia, but you will always be a bitter failure. You will always be the pathetic woman who had to beg me for grocery money. I will recover from this, but you will just fade right back into irrelevance." I took a slow, deep breath. I let go of the doorknob and turned around. I walked deliberately back toward the long glass table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floorboards. If a camera had been circling me in that exact moment, capturing the room in a smooth, continuous, sweeping motion, it would have recorded the absolute shift in power. The gravity in the room belonged entirely to me. I was radiating a cold, undeniable dominance that made Kevin physically shrink back into his seat. I stopped directly across from Marcus. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his wrinkled blue suit. He was clinging to his job at the bank as if it were a life raft in the middle of a raging ocean. He genuinely believed that because he wore a tie and managed a group of tellers, he was untouchable. I looked down at Sarah. She did not say a word. She simply opened a secondary compartment in her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out one final single sheet of paper. She placed it perfectly in the center of the glass table and slid it across to Marcus. It was not printed on the thick, cream-colored paper of the law firm. It was printed on bright white premium corporate stock. At the top of the page in bold navy blue ink was the distinctive geometric logo of Vanguard Horizon. Marcus stared at the logo, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice losing a fraction of its aggressive volume. "That is your reality check, Marcus," I replied, my tone completely even and devoid of any sympathy. "You just stood there and confidently told me that your bank suspended you pending an investigation. You told me you were going to clear your name and rebuild your life. But you are operating under a massive misunderstanding of who exactly you are dealing with." I took a slow step to my right, keeping my eyes locked onto his terrified face. "A month ago, my financial technology company was purchased for $40 million by Vanguard Horizon," I explained. "But what I did not mention earlier is that Vanguard is a massive aggressive investment fund. They do not just buy software, they buy entire financial institutions. During the exact same week they finalized the acquisition of my company, they also executed a hostile takeover of the regional banking network here in Georgia." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing visibly in his throat. He looked down at the paper, then back up at me. "Yes, Marcus," I said, offering him a razor-thin smile. "Vanguard Horizon owns your bank. And as part of my $40 million buyout agreement, I demanded a permanent seat on their executive advisory board. I was hired specifically to oversee the integration of my security algorithms and to audit the internal compliance protocols of all newly acquired branch locations. Which means, legally speaking, I am a major shareholder and a senior executive at the company you work for." Brenda let out a soft, horrified whimper from the corner of the table. She pressed her hands over her mouth, staring at me as if I had just transformed into a terrifying monster right in front of her eyes. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the document sitting in front of him. That is not a suspension notice, Marcus. That is an official and immediate termination of your employment. Read the signature line at the bottom of the page. Marcus' hands trembled violently as he picked up the crisp white paper. He scanned the heavy black text, his eyes darting back and forth. When he reached the bottom of the page, the remaining color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a literal ghost. Printed clearly beneath the authorized signature line was my full name and my new corporate title. "I fired you, Marcus," I said, the words echoing with beautiful, absolute finality. "I personally reviewed the forensic audit of your branch. I used the exact software I coded in my home office to track every single one of your illegal administrative overrides. I watched the digital trail of stolen money flow from my decoy checking account directly into Kevin offshore sports betting accounts. You thought I was a failure playing on a computer while you were out being a powerful provider. But my code caught your theft in less than 4 seconds." He dropped the termination letter onto the glass table as if it were burning his fingers. "You cannot do this," he whispered, his voice completely hollow. "You cannot just fire me. I have a pension, I have stock options. I have a career." I shook my head slowly. "You have absolutely nothing," I corrected him. "Read the cause of termination printed in the second paragraph. You are being fired with cause for gross professional misconduct, abuse of administrative privileges, and 72 suspected counts of federal wire fraud. Because you are being terminated for severe financial crimes, your company pension is completely voided, your stock options are permanently canceled, and your corporate banking license will be officially revoked by the State Financial Board by the end of business today. You will never work in the financial sector ever again." Kevin let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying his face deeper into his hands. He knew the criminal indictments were real, and he knew Marcus had absolutely no resources left to save either of them. Marcus' legs simply gave out. He collapsed backward into his leather chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. The arrogant branch manager who had aggressively slammed my credit card statement onto the kitchen counter was completely gone. The man who had humiliated me for a measly $85 was totally destroyed. He was sitting in a law firm with no house, no wife, no career, no money, and a looming federal prison sentence. I leaned over the glass table, resting my hands flat against the cool surface, bringing my face just inches away from his. "You spent 4 years trying to convince me that I was a burden, Marcus," I whispered, my voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. "You made me clip coupons. You made me beg for a $4 grocery tax. You told your mother I was a failure. You let Heather parade around with a Prada bag bought with my stolen money. You tried to build a kingdom by stepping on my neck." He slowly brought his eyes down to meet mine. There was no anger left in them. There was only absolute, terrifying despair. "But you forgot one very important rule," I continued. "You never hand a brilliant woman $85 and tell her it is all she is worth. Because she will take that insult, she will turn it into absolute poison, and she will feed it right back to you. I did not just survive your financial abuse, Marcus. I weaponized it. I bought your bank. I took your house. I destroyed your fraudulent empire. And I did it all while smiling and serving you generic brand chicken." I stood up straight, adjusting the strap of my designer bag on my shoulder. I looked over at Brenda, who was openly weeping now, rocking back and forth in her chair. I looked at Kevin, who was completely paralyzed by his own impending doom. And finally, I looked back down at the shattered man who used to be my husband. "The $85 taped to the bathroom mirror is your severance package, Marcus," I said, my voice bright and cheerful. "I highly suggest you stretch it out. Federal commissary accounts can be quite expensive." I turned my back on them for the final time. I did not look over my shoulder. I walked confidently across the massive conference room, pulled the heavy oak door open, and stepped out into the brightly lit hallway. The heavy door clicked firmly shut behind me, completely sealing Marcus, Brenda, and Kevin inside their self-made tomb of consequences. I walked toward the glass elevators, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for 4 long years had completely vanished. I pressed the button for the lobby and watched the digital numbers light up. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer a submissive wife, shrinking myself to fit into a toxic family narrative. I was a 32-year-old self-made multimillionaire, and my entirely new life was waiting for me the exact moment those elevator doors opened. The elevator doors opened to the pristine marble lobby of the law firm building. The space was massive and bright, filled with the quiet hum of wealthy professionals going about their day. Before I could take 5 steps toward the revolving glass doors, I heard the frantic, echoing clicking of heels behind me. "Nia, wait, please." I stopped and turned slowly. It was Brenda. She had clearly scrambled onto the adjacent elevator to chase me down, leaving her shattered sons completely paralyzed upstairs. She rushed in front of me, physically blocking my path to the exit. Her face was an absolute mess of smeared mascara and running tears. She reached out and grabbed my forearm, her grip desperate and trembling. "Please, Nia," she begged, her voice cracking loudly, drawing the curious stares of several passing attorneys. "You cannot do this to Marcus. He is my son. He made a terrible mistake, but he is a good man deep down. You are family. You have so much money now. You do not need to send him to federal prison. Please just call the bank. Tell the federal agents it was a misunderstanding. I will do anything. I will get on my knees right here on this floor and apologize for everything I ever said to you." I looked down at her wrinkled hands clutching the fabric of my custom designer jacket. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel anger either. I just felt completely indifferent to her suffering. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm. "You are completely missing the point, Brenda," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "Marcus did not make a mistake. Forgetting to buy milk is a mistake. Committing 72 counts of federal wire fraud to steal from your own wife is a series of highly calculated malicious decisions. He made his bed and now he is going to lie in it for a very long time. And as for your apology, you can keep it. You did not want to apologize when you were sitting in my house eating my food, telling me to shrink myself so your son could shine. You loved watching him humiliate me. You only want to apologize now because the fake crown you put on his head just locked him in a cage." I stepped around her. She collapsed heavily to her knees on the cold marble floor, sobbing hysterically, covering her face with her hands. I did not look back, not even for a second. Over the next 3 months, the absolute destruction of Marcus Wilson became a matter of highly publicized public record. True to the strict eviction notice, the county sheriff arrived at the luxury property that exact Friday morning. It was a beautiful sunny day in the affluent neighborhood. The neighbors Marcus had tried so hard to impress stood on their manicured lawns and watched the entire spectacle unfold. Marcus was physically escorted off the premises. He had absolutely no money to hire professional movers, so he was forced to carry his expensive tailored suits in black plastic trash bags, dragging them out to the curb. He had to move into Brenda Damp basement, just as I predicted. But he did not stay there for long. The federal authorities moved with devastating speed. Because I had handed them an airtight forensic audit detailing exactly how he manipulated the bank internal servers, they did not even need my verbal testimony to secure a grand jury indictment. Marcus was formally charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Without a high-priced criminal defense attorney to negotiate a plea deal, his overworked public defender was completely useless against the aggressive federal prosecutors. Marcus stood in the federal courthouse, looking incredibly small, in a cheap, oversized jumpsuit, and was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. The arrogant man, who was absolutely obsessed with controlling his environment and dictating my grocery budget, was now being told exactly when to eat, when to sleep, and when to speak by armed prison guards. Kevin's fate was not much better. Heather made good on her vicious threat. She filed for an immediate hostile divorce and handed every single shred of financial evidence she had directly over to the police in exchange for full legal immunity. Kevin was convicted as an accessory to the massive fraud. He received a lighter sentence of 3 years, but he walked away from his marriage with absolutely nothing. Heather took what little equity they had in their heavily mortgaged home, sold the stolen Prada bag to pay the security deposit for a cheap apartment, and completely erased Kevin from her life. The toxic family alliance that had thrived on arrogance and manipulation had been entirely eradicated. Brenda was left completely alone in her large, empty house, her golden child locked behind federal bars, and her grand empire of lies reduced to absolute ash. She had no one left to brag about, and no one left to control. While their world rotted away in prison cells and empty basements, my world expanded into something incredibly beautiful. I took my seat on the executive advisory board of Vanguard Horizon. I walked into corporate boardrooms filled with the most powerful financial minds in the country, and they listened to every single word I had to say. My security algorithms were implemented across hundreds of banking branches, protecting millions of dollars from the exact type of fraud my ex-husband had committed. I was no longer hiding my brilliance in a dark home office. I was shining brighter than anyone ever thought possible. If you were watching me on that final day as I left the law firm after dropping the ultimate bomb on my abusers, you would see a woman completely reborn. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors of the high-rise building and stepped out into the bright, warm Atlanta sunlight. I walked down the wide concrete steps, moving with a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The world around me seemed to slow down. The gentle breeze caught my hair. My stride was confident and relaxed, carrying a perfect rhythmic power. A radiant, unbothered smile spread across my face. The heavy, suffocating chains of emotional abuse and financial manipulation had been completely shattered. I was no longer the submissive wife desperately trying to stretch an $85 allowance. I was the absolute architect of my own destiny. A woman who recognized her own infinite value and absolutely refused to let anyone discount it ever again. A sleek black luxury car pulled up to the curb, its polished exterior reflecting the towering city skyline. The driver respectfully stepped out and opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the plush leather seat, crossing my legs comfortably. I poured myself a chilled glass of sparkling water from the center console. I leaned forward, resting my arm gracefully against the window frame, and looked directly into the camera lens as it slowly pushed in for a tight, intimate close-up. Women never let anyone value you at $85. Take that money and go buy their entire bank instead. Like and subscribe if you are ready to take control of your life. Build your empire in absolute silence and let your success be the loudest sound they ever hear.